I'm Dave Breakenridge, and this is Under the Dome. Less than 3 months after declaring Alberta open for business, Premier Jason Kenney has announced a host of new COVID-19 measures meant to stem a fourth wave that has stretched our health system to the brink. We're now facing a renewed mask mandate, physical distancing measures, capacity limits, and restrictions on social gatherings, though there are exemptions for businesses who demand proof of vaccination. All this comes after weeks of warning that a crisis is coming to our hospitals. As of this recording, more than 800 people are in hospital with COVID-19, and a record number of ICU patients have stretched resources and have Alberta looking to other provinces for help. So how did we get here? And what's the political fallout for the Premier? That's all today on Under the Dome. So, after summer away, we are back in the room. We have Rick Bell from the Calgary Sun. We have David Staples from the Edmonton Journal. Thanks for joining me, guys. I want to jump right into it here, but I want to step back a little bit because Alberta right now is at a place where we have hundreds of people in hospital, hundreds of people in ICU. We're at an all-time record for ICU patients total. Many of them are COVID-19 patients. Alberta's healthcare system is under strain, so much so that Alberta Premier Jason Kenney, who had previously said Alberta was open for summer, open for good, now we're having to take a few steps back into some new restrictions. We have a variation of a vaccine passport. David, the simple question is, how did we get here?
We got here because they made a bet. The Alberta government, I think, essentially made a bet on freedom. That they felt that the numbers that they were seeing out of the United Kingdom justified opening up completely. What they saw in the UK was that when a place hit by the Delta variant earlier than we had, that the high level of vaccination there seemed to create a wave, but not a wave of disease that threatened their healthcare system. And they were thinking with certainty, too much certainty, it turns out, and they've apologized for that, that we were going to have the same thing in Alberta, that we could open up completely and we would be okay, that we would get a flow, a big flow, and some kind of a wave of the unvaccinated getting sick and filling our hospitals, but not enough to threaten the ICUs with being overrun. And that's where they got it wrong. That's why we are where we are now.
Now, Rick, this very much seemed, I know people have been comparing it to George W. Bush's Mission Accomplished banner. We had the open for summer banner or open for business banner with Jason Kenney and Health Minister Tyler Shandro at the beginning of the summer. What do you make of the miscalculation or how we got to where we are?
Well, I think David's pointed out the health aspect to this. I'm going to point out the political aspect to this. This is part of a political plan as well, layered on the healthcare numbers and healthcare plan, which is the desperate need for this premier to make a political comeback. So the plan was as follows. Open for summer. He's down in the polls. Everybody happy, has a great summer. We come back in the fall. He can make the, let's call it Alberta First people, the separatists, the people discontented with his lack of attack on Ottawa, will make them happy in the fall with the Fair Deal panel and having an equalization referendum, all that. And then when that's over, which is, by the way, just a little over a month from now, then he will get a reset back to jobs, the economy, pipelines, and back to 2019 and everybody loving him and another 22-point landslide a year and a half from now. So there was also the real desire to see what they wanted to see. And the big fatal flaw wasn't just that they made the decision to open for summer, but they said it was over. I was in BC this summer. They also had an open for summer, but it wasn't all over. And they haven't suffered as Alberta did because the authorities there said, yeah, we're opening up for summer, but bad things could still happen. The Delta variant is still out there. Be cautious. Let's watch the numbers. Let's see what happens. Here it was, open forever. And as far as the vaccination rate, yes, there are reluctant people. Yes, there are people opposed to the vaccination rates. But when you tell people it's over, that suppresses the desire to get vaccinated. Why am I going to get vaccinated for something that's no big deal? And
so in your mind, it was a miscalculation in terms of not just the reopening and how they reopened and how they thought it would be tied to a drop in cases, but also the messaging that they were giving.
Oh, absolutely. That was crucial because people don't understand. People don't pay attention enough to go into the weeds and understand all the small print. What they understand is what they heard and what I heard. And I was happy too. Party time. Let's go. Out with the masks and let's rock and roll, including me. And where it really hit me, Dave, is when I decided to escape from the fires choking Calgary in August, and I went for a week to Vancouver. And I stayed in downtown Vancouver, which had, and why did I go there? Because it didn't have any restrictions. It had no masks. It was recommended, but not mandatory. And I saw a totally different attitude. And then I began to wonder, why is there a different attitude there than here? I think a lot of people took this as a carte blanche to start celebrating touchdown dance time, and it didn't work. And then last night, he had a chance. I gave him a chance in that news conference when he didn't do it the first time to really come out with an apology. What does he say? I apologize for saying it was moving from a pandemic to an endemic, but I don't apologize for opening. So in other words, I'm not apologizing for opening for summer, but I am apologizing for opening for summer. I mean, and I think you will see the reviews today will not be good either within the UCP tent or outside. And I think you'll see that in the coming days, that this was not a showstopper of a performance.
It's a solid point that you're making.
David, what do you make of
it? Rick, I think that's a really solid point about the failure here being the public health messaging aspect of it, the kind of the triumphalism of the Kenney government in announcing the best summer ever. And I was also in BC. Unfortunately, I chose fiery Kelowna and Vernon over less. I was also in Victoria. You're right. There was a different attitude there. And it's a strong comparison. Hinshaw has done a good job, I think, of recognizing her part in the public health messaging. That's her job. That's what she's supposed to do, is get the message right. I think she's done a good job in recognizing that failure and owning it, apologizing for it. Kenney, I think he's right. Like, I think he made, a reasonable bet on opening up Alberta this summer. I think it's defensible, but the messaging is where he got it wrong, and he continues to get it wrong by not owning up to the messaging being incorrect. And because the messaging was so strong, it probably led to him. It was clear a couple of weeks ago that as much as vaccine passports are a terrible policy, they harm people. They hammer hardest the poor people where the vaccination rates are the lowest. There's a systemic issue with them. He needed to move quicker on that. And I think because he had been so strong earlier on, it became more difficult to do that. So he compounded the error of the summer by not quickly adjusting like Doug Ford did Ontario and bring in the vaccine passports earlier.
Now, I mean, looking to Wednesday night's press conference, this idea that, okay, things are looking really bad here. We're back in a public health emergency, which is, I think, somewhere that no one wanted us to get to. We need to bring in not just a vaccine passport, which they didn't want to call a vaccine passport, and we can talk a little bit about that, but also we're bringing in restrictions on we're bringing restrictions on indoor gatherings for people who are even vaccinated. We're bringing back some restrictions on venues, on capacity of retail stores and things like that. And then we have the restriction exemption. David, what did you make of everything that they brought in, of the package of restrictions and then this passport, but not a passport?
It was a little Chandro's delivery, the health minister's delivery of what the rules are was a little confusing, because initially I'm starting to listen to him. Here's what the restrictions are, and I'm getting angrier and angrier. I'm fully vaccinated. I do not accept a lockdown of the fully vaccinated. I don't think it's needed. So as he's enunciating it, it sounds like there's all these measures. It's going to hit restaurants. It's going to hit, like I play on a hockey team. I want to keep playing hockey. I think fully vaccinated people need to keep exercising. We all do. And then it comes out, well, actually, there's going to be the exemptions. And so some restaurants, you'll be able to go to restaurants if maybe you can play hockey. I still don't know if the hockey leagues for adults are going to go ahead if they buy into this program. So there was a little bit of uncertainty, a lot of uncertainty. That starts to come clear, though, today as we're sorting through it. Well, maybe we can keep going to restaurants if we're fully vaccinated. Maybe we can keep playing hockey. Maybe things aren't going to actually change that much for the fully vaccinated. Maybe they didn't want to say that as part of their message, that it's still going to be pretty wide open for all of us who are fully vaccinated. But so right there was confusion. Maybe that's just goes with complicated health regulations. There's always going to be confusion, but I see there's a lot of anger. Like, I don't know what you guys are seeing. There has been there's just such an outpouring of rage at the unvaccinated right now in Alberta, across Canada. So I think one of the strongest parts of the messaging last night was Hinshaw saying, hey, take it easy on each other, be gentle with each other. We all need to be reminded of that. And the strength of her approach has always been to remind us of that listen, we're in this together. We've got to stick together. So I give her credit. It's easy just to overlook little comments like that, but it is her number one asset. And, calls for Hinshaw to resign. Kenney would be the last person to call for Hinshaw to resign. He needs her. He needs what she has brought right from the start. And she came through again. I thought she's been coming through in terms of owning up to the mistake here and putting out the right message right now. In terms of the overall, what the restrictions are, Dave, I think we're still in the figuring out mode. What is that going to be? Every business right now is thinking, how does this impact me? Can we still keep going with fully vaccinated people coming in and the rules not being that stringent in terms of them? So there's some unknowns about that.
Yeah, Rick, what was your big takeaway from Wednesday night's presser? Was it Kenney? Was it the confusing messaging? Was it the apology, but not an apology, but also an apology? Like, what was your thoughts when they said, okay, that's it for questions, we're all done for the night?
Well, all of the above. I agree completely with David's assessment of the confusing messaging. They buried the lead, which was what are the vaccinated able to do? And they should have led with that and started with that, but they went through this laundry list of restrictions until we finally got to it. I mean, it's pretty bad when the Calgary Chamber puts out an early morning release today, Calgary Chamber of Commerce, saying, we need clarification on what's actually going on. That's usually a bad sign that you didn't get your message out correctly. I agree with him. Dr. Hinshaw is not the issue. Kenney is the issue. And again, he had an opportunity to perhaps maybe turn things around a little more. As I say, I gave him an opportunity again. And, he didn't take it. I mean, this morning when I woke up, I turned on the TV and I was flipping channels and I got to, CBC National. And Trudeau was being asked questions in Montreal. First question about Alberta. Second question about Alberta. Aaron O'Toole, questions about Alberta. I mean, Albertans always like to be, we're a leader in Canada. In fact, Chandra said that at the Open for Summer. We're a leader. We're Alberta. We're ahead of the rest of those guys in Canada. Well, we're not a leader. We're at near the bottom in vaccinations. We're the worst. And what was one of the questions? What was the general theme of the questions to the Liberal leader? Why didn't you do more to save Albertans from themselves in August? Like, gee, when you're getting beat up by Trudeau, that's a pretty bad sign. But yeah, I think all of the above. I think it was an opportunity. The messaging was confusing. Chandro, as usual, was not articulate. Dr. Hinshaw can only bail out so much the Premier, and the Premier was the Premier. He doesn't think anything is really that wrong. So why would he do a more fulsome apology? Why would he do some kind of a reset? He thinks everything is probably not that bad. It's really stunning to me. I just can't believe it.
Yeah, the last time that Jason Kenney had a press conference and he focused a lot of his frustration at the unvaccinated, you had kind of a groundswell of anger from a certain segment of the population, the unvaccinated, but also you saw some grumblings from his caucus. You had one MLA write a letter apologizing for the premier, saying he was, essentially being mean to the unvaccinated. When there's been lots of discussion about who the audience Kenney is speaking to, whether it's his base, whether it's the public, whether it's the health community, who is the message of these restrictions generated at, and how does it fare for him with the holdouts?
With the
David?
With the unvaccinated, are they going to be, have you talked to the unvaccinated online? I mean, in discussions, like it's very, it's very illuminating when you start to, like, I had supported not having a vaccine passport because I see the harm in them. Then I just like, no, we've got to do it. Like this is getting to a crisis situation. And then I start to have debates and arguments with the unvaccinated. Like I think there's a large percentage of them that are just procrastinators or kind of on the fence, and this is going to reach them. And we're going to see a fairly significant uptick in vaccinations. But the people who are hardcore, there will be no reaching them. The only thing that might reach them is the threat that they might lose their job if they're unvaccinated, which is a really tough consequence for that kind of decision. But it's some people are going to be facing that. They're going to be looking at that. I think Kenney's biggest failing in communication is a little bit more complicated. What he's been trying to do is say, I have a balancing act. There's real harm from the virus. There's also real harm from the lockdown. Now, if you're making the argument that there's real harm from the virus, you have numbers every single day to pound that drum, beat that drum, case numbers, death numbers, ICU numbers. They have become the story. We have become obsessed with those numbers. I think there's just as much, if not more, far more harm from the lockdown. And progressive politicians like Trudeau completely never mention that in their calculations. They never bring it up. The problem for Kenney is it's hard to quantify that. It's hard to quantify mental health numbers. It's hard to quantify economic distress. It's hard to we're starting to get obesity numbers. We're starting to get some mental health numbers, opioid death numbers. They're starting to come out now. They will become more clear as the years go by what the real cost of the lockdown was. But we don't have daily numbers on that. His job, though, as the premier, was to do a better job in getting those numbers together, whatever numbers he had, and presenting them continually and making the argument about the harm of the lockdown. Because there's a huge percentage of the population that never thinks about that. Maybe they've got a secure job, full-time government job. Maybe they have massive health concerns that are driving their own fear of the virus. These are fair concerns on their part. But there's other equally valid concerns. Both Kenney and Hinshaw haven't done a good enough job quantifying and expressing those. And that's, I think, really the essence of their political problem right now.
Rick, what about you? This idea that, people in the unvaccinated crowd or people within his own caucus are like, well, why are you picking on us? Well, everybody, like right now, as the premier has said, as both of you have written, we're in a crisis of the unvaccinated right now. That should be the target. These are the same people who probably at the beginning of the pandemic were complaining that, it's not that bad. It's just people who are unhealthy and who have comorbidity. Like the same people who are complaining about being mistreated for being targeted are the same people who are downplaying the pandemic from the get-go. So how does Kenney deal with some of that anger when there are people that are just going to whine about it, that, you're being unfair to us?
So the anger within the caucus or the anger in the general public? I think David's right. With some of the people in the general public, I was at the Foothills Hospital for a small protest of the anti-vaxxers. I mean, that dog won't hunt. That's not going to happen. So if you're talking about in the caucus right now is just so, including the people that are pro-vaxxers, are just there's a lot of people just very angry at Kenney from all sides. It's coming from all angles. It's not just coming from the unvaccinated. I mean, it will be really nice when they actually, because they've been so late with this, they don't really have the technology for a vaccine passport yet, as you know. People are going to still be using I'm going to be still using the long form that I received when I got my shot. But I don't think he's going to win. I think at some point he has to, as David's pointed out a couple of times already, been far more effective at communicating his message, whatever that is. And B, there are some people he is not going to please. And who is he supposed to please? You know, the polls showed that vaccine passports were the way to go. I remember when they did the lockdowns, and you know, I was not as harsh as some people on the lockdown question, but they would tell me, we have polls that show that we cannot lose the vote of suburbia, and suburbia wants the lockdowns, and so we have to do this. But then when I point out, well, what about all these polls showing that there's growing support for a vaccine passport? Well, but there's liberty issues and there's freedom issues. I mean, you know, they're cherry picking the polls. I think some people in the unvaccinated are reluctant. Some of them were even suppressed during the summer because they thought nothing was happening. Now that they know that they could have a little bit more freedom if they're vaccinated than unvaccinated, if the website actually gets up and going, I think once things become clearer, yeah, the numbers will start going up. But we're playing a lot of catch up here because we're several points lower than a lot of the other provinces. So I think that'll happen. But if he wants to be the premier where everybody's going to be happy, I'm going to be in the center. I'm going to be on the line between the two lanes. No. At some point, you're a leader. You have to say, this is what we're doing. If some people want to join the People's Party of Alberta and create one, and that's going to be for people that think that it's all George Soros's fault or whatever, then go do it. I mean, at some point he's got to make a stand and be clearer. But I think that door is closing on it.
Just one final word about some empathy for the unvaccinated. I get that people have a real fear of this vaccine. That no one does know the long-term effects of this vaccine. That's a fact. And it's also really it's terrible if you're singled out for lockdown measures, singled out from everyone else. That's a terrible thing. But I can't shake the fact that if we were all us adults got vaccinated, we wouldn't have 220 people in ICU with COVID. We'd have 20. We'd have 20. You're 32 times more likely over the last 4 months to end up in ICU if you're unvaccinated compared to vaccinated. And now this is spilling over onto all of us, all of the fully vaccinated people who are going through this. We're facing this lockdown could get worse, and we're facing that. Like this is blown up big. So as tough as it is on the unvaccinated, I support these measures. They are the people. This is a pandemic of the unvaccinated. They've got to either get vaccinated or stay home until this wave is done and our hospitals get back to normal. So I'm hoping some of them will rethink their decision. And, I'll be talking to the unvaccinated people that I know and explaining why I support this passport, even though I know that it really bothers them.
Rick, last word to you. Do you think this is finally the stick that the unvaccinated need to at least get a push in big enough numbers for us to make some headway on stemming this pandemic?
Nobody really knows. I think it's been shown that in other provinces where you have a clearly defined and easily accessible vaccine passport, that the numbers do go up, and with that, it helps the numbers, COVID numbers, go down. The big thing I'm going to be looking for in the coming days is not just how many people get vaccinated in the next few days, but what the fallout politically will be for the premier, which is, of course, for another day. But I think that's also going to be a serious set of stories that are going to go on in the days to come.
Mm-hmm. Well, we'll be watching it very closely over the next coming weeks. David Staples, Rick Bell, thanks very much for your time.
Thanks, Dave and Rick.
Thank you.
That's it for Under the Dome. Thanks again to my guests, David Staples and Rick Bell. You can find all past episodes at edmontonjournal.com/underthedome, or you can hit the subscribe button on YouTube. I'm Dave Breakenridge. We'll see you next time.